Welcome back, everyone, to the late night review. And I thought, what better movie to have on New Year's Eve? I hope I put this video out New Year's Eve. At least that's the plan. I'm pre-recording it and getting it ready for New Year's Eve. And I don't think there's really a better choice for a movie, at least in my book, than the classic, The Time Machine. 1960, Rod Taylor was in this movie. And it actually won an Academy Award for visual effects, I think, in 1961. This is a movie I love. It's one of those movies I could put on, not only on New Year's Eve, I can put it on anytime and just watch it. I just love this movie. It's one of my favorites of all time. And the rewatchability is just off the charts. I like the story, H.G. Wells' classic, The Time Machine. And it's set on New Year's Eve. And what a thing it would be to have a time machine to go anywhere you want, whether into the past or in the future. What an escape, especially if you have a lot of stuff going on in your life that you're not crazy about. You can get into that time machine and go anywhere you want. And this movie, it's kind of escapist entertainment, but it's a mixture of drama. It's sci-fi, has action in it. And Rod Taylor, I've always liked Rod Taylor. I never did see the remake of this movie. I think it was a remake, but they made one. I never seen it. Jeremy Irons is one of my favorite actors of all time, and I believe he was in the remake, although I've never seen it. But this is such a classic to me. Rod Taylor he's always been one of my favorite actors. I've seen him in The Twilight Zone. He was in The Birds. The movie that I know him most from and that I've seen the most, especially when I was growing up, was this movie, The Time Machine. And I really love it. And it has a really good cast. And I believe Alan Smith, not Alan Smith, but Alan Young. I do all my videos on memory. I don't have any script. I just kind of go on memory because I've seen these movies so many times. I usually talk about movies I have nostalgia for, and this is one of them. I think it's Alan Young, I believe. Alan Smith or Alan Young. I think it's Alan Young who plays his friend David Philby, and he does a really good part, and he plays different roles in here. When he travels into the future, Rod Taylor, that is, George, and he sees a descendant of his, but it's actually Alan Young playing the part, I believe. Sebastian Cabot is one of his friends in here, and I remember him from The Twilight Zone, A Nice Place to Visit. That was one of my very favorite Twilight Zones of all time, where one of the guys, this thief, I think he dies, and he goes to what he thinks is heaven, but actually it's a trick and it's hell, and at the end it's revealed. That's one of my favorite Twilight Zones with Sebastian Cabot, A Nice Place to Visit. But Rod Taylor was perfect for this role. And then Alan Young, I mentioned him, and his voice is really good too. And here you can kind of listen to him talk for hours. I love the conversation and the dialogue between Rod Taylor's character George and his friends, and he shows them the small scale version of the time machine that he made as a test, as a demonstration. He's trying to present it to them. And that whole dialogue, that whole section of the film is very intriguing. Takes place on New Year's Eve. He invites them over. And it's the turn of the century. I believe it's 1899 in the film. And they're about to go into 1900. And I guess technically, though, the turn of the century would be 1901, just like the turn of the century recently, not too recently, but in 2000, people were saying it's the turn of the century. But actually, 2001, I think, was the real turn of the century. But be that as it may, the movie presents a New Year's Eve scenario, and he says, I want to see the old century out by myself tonight. And his friend kind of gets an inkling like he's going to use the time machine, and he says, do you promise me? And it's one of my favorite parts of the movie, but he turns around and tells his friend, that's Alan Smith, tells George, played by Rod Taylor, and he turns to him and he says, would you promise me one thing, George, that you won't go out of the house tonight? And and he replies and he says, "I promise you I won't go out the door." And you know he's going to use that time machine. That really sets it up. He's going to use that time machine tonight on New Year's Eve, and who knows where he's going to go. And it's really fascinating when he finally uses it. And no wonder it has good special effects. I mean, for a 1960s movie, it has good special effects. And I believe it did win the Academy Award. That I did look up before I did this video. It won an Academy Award, I believe, in 1960 or 61 for visual effects. And the effects are good. I've always liked the effects. I think they're very, very well done. And I like how the story goes. Parts of it are dark, parts of it are very interesting, dramatic. I do really like how he fights the Morlocks, and he's, later on when he fights those creatures, the Morlocks that are kind of keeping the Eloi as cattle so they can eat them. The Morlocks are cannibals. They devolved into cannibals. They live underground, and the Eloi are a very naive group of people, and they live above. They don't know what's going on, and how it flushes it out. There's a lot of commentary and there's a lot of symbolism in this movie. There's a lot of different meanings, and you can apply certain things in this movie to real life. And there's social commentaries in this movie. It's a pretty deep story, pretty good. The great H.G. Wells wrote it, and it's very fascinating. And I love the interaction between Rod Taylor's character and the Eloi, and of course the Morlocks who play the cannibals. They live underground, and when he's fighting them, I like some of the fights in there are really good, and the way Rod Taylor throws the punches are they're pretty quick, and he threw some of those punches really good. And when he was a kid, he used to box, and he was picked on by other kids when he was really young. He was lean, very skinny. So he said he went into, I believe he said he went into amateur boxing as a kid for a defensive measure, just for self-defense. He got into amateur boxing, and then he became captain of the surf club, I believe, when he was a kid. He was born in Australia, I think, and a great actor. I always liked him, and I always thought, at least my idea was that if they made a remake, which I believe they did, but I always thought Mel Gibson could have played the part, because Rod Taylor and Mel Gibson always kind of reminded me of each other, two of my favorite actors of all time. And although I think Rod Taylor reminds me more of Mel Gibson than Mel Gibson reminds me of Rod Taylor, I think, but I always saw they're both from Australia, but I always saw a similarity there. Rod Taylor has been really good in everything I've seen him in. The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock directed The Birds. That was a really good movie. But The Time Machine is really one of my favorites. I like The Birds, but I actually like The Time Machine significantly better. The Time Machine is not only one of my favorite classic movies of all time, but it's really one of my favorite movies of all time from any genre. I really like how he talks to the Eloi, and then the character Weena, the girl that he meets, and they pretty much don't know what's going on. They've been deceived by the Morlocks, and they're very indifferent to suffering. They're very indifferent. And that's a social commentary. There's too many people in the world that are indifferent to a lot of evils going on and a lot of bad things. And that's another social commentary in this film. There's a lot of them in this film, and this film is a pretty deep film. The story is, and it really shows up on film when Rod Taylor saves Weena. I believe it's Weena from drowning. Everyone else is just watching the drowning take place, and they're just totally oblivious to what's going on. And Rod Taylor gets angry and he says, "What are you doing? Help her!" And then he goes in and rescues her and pulls her out, and everyone's indifferent. She herself doesn't even realize that he saved her life, and she just walks and goes on. But the Eloi, they know less than people nowadays. They know less in terms of they're very naive. They're not privy to a lot of stuff, so they're less to blame than a lot of people in our time who have indifference to evil and to suffering. But Rod Taylor, he jumped in, he saved her. No one thanked him. Everyone was just. But later on, he befriends Weena, and he starts to understand that they've been bred and brainwashed by the Morlock, and so they have more of an excuse. They have more. They're off the hook more than um, people in other societies and other cultures and other time frames because they know less. When you get to know the Eloi in this movie, you really understand that they're totally in the dark. They live above ground, but they're totally in the dark up here. They see the top, they see the beautiful scenery, they see the sun come out. The Morlocks are living in the dark, but the Morlocks are pulling the strings. The people living above in this beautiful place are in the dark. And that's another interesting aspect of this film. And there's so many layers to this film. I love the acting, I love the dialogue, I love the score, and it's fascinating, it's interesting. And speaking of indifference, when he rescued her and everyone's just watching and they're indifferent, they never even lifted a finger to help her. Reminds me of those horrible videos you see on the news where someone suffering or getting beat up and people just start filming it, not because they want to help the police with the investigation, because videos do help and they could show that to the police, but they film it because they're indifferent and they just want to see it. People like that who are really low lifes who do that and just totally ignore the evils that's going on. I'm just going to film this because I'm interested. I don't care about the person getting hurt. Real low lifes, people like that pisses me off. In this movie, though, when you get to know the Eloi and you understand, I mean, it's still not an excuse. It's still not good, but they they were born and conditioned and tricked, brainwashed by the Morlocks. And the story it doesn't really get in depth. I mean, if you read the book, which I've never read the whole book, I've never read it from beginning to end. I don't even know if I've read part of it. I might have a long time ago. I don't think so. I know I've read 1984. That was a classic. And there's a couple movies on that. That was good too. I did read 1984 from beginning to end. And that was George Orwell, though, not H.G. Wells. That was a classic. But the usually the movies never get in depth as much as the books, but there's a lot of social commentary. There's a lot of messages that you can get from it, and maybe even apply to your own life. It's kind of escapist entertainment also, the fact that you can have a time machine and just go wherever you want to go, get away from your problems and all the stresses of life and whatever's got you down. But it's a good movie. It has a good message. Rod Taylor is kind of like a teacher to the Eloi later. And this is a spoiler review. Almost all my videos are spoiler reviews because they're movies I've seen over and over again, and they've been out for years and years. They're movies that I have nostalgia for. It's such a classic, and I think it's a must-watch on New Year's Eve. I think it's one of those movies that's perfect for New Year's Eve. The score is so good. The acting is really good. The colors, I think the colors and the quality of the colors and back in those days, especially for those days, are really good. And like I said, it had the Academy Award for visual effects. But the movie is very, very well acted. The score is fantastic. The score really sets the mood and the atmosphere of the film. It's such a good movie, I think, to watch on New Year's Eve. And if you haven't seen it, it's a classic. It's not a slow pace. I just want to say it's an older movie, but it's not a slow pace. Whether there's action or sci-fi stuff going on or time travel or a great dialogue, there's always something happening, whether it's good dialogue, special effects, or fighting. And there's always something going on. I think it's fun. It's a very good story, very well done, and I can't say how much I like it enough. And if you haven't seen The Time Machine with Rod Taylor, I highly recommend it. And this has been the Late Night Review. Please like and subscribe and share this video. Hype it up, pump it up, let other people know so they can see this type of content. And Happy New Year, everybody. Have a good night.